A black family was denied entry because they looked like trouble. They bought out the airline's parent company. They thought it was just going to be a simple family trip, a chance to celebrate new beginnings and gather with loved ones. Little did they know one fateful encounter at the airport would change their lives forever. The Johnson family, Martin, Ebony, their children Kayla and Jaden, and the ever-wise Grandma Dorothy, were just trying to board a flight when everything turned upside down. Unfounded suspicions and blatant prejudice led to their public humiliation as they were denied entry to a flight they had rightfully booked. Outrage ignited a spark they never knew they had. Before this was over, they would own the very airline that scorned them. Martin Johnson awoke before dawn in Atlanta's suburbs, excitement crackling in the chilly morning air. He stood by the driveway loading suitcases into the family's SUV for a long-anticipated trip to Chicago. His wife Ebony soon joined him, checking that their children, 10-year-old Kayla and 8-year-old Jaden, had everything they needed. Even Grandma Dorothy at 73 moved with focused energy as she finished her tea and slipped into the car. This getaway was meant to bring the extended family together and give the kids a chance to explore a new city. No one expected that a single airport encounter would shake them to their cores. On the drive to Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, the children chatted eagerly about skyscrapers and the Ferris wheel on Navy Pier. Dorothy smiled, recalling her own youthful wonder, but she remained watchful. Having lived through decades of social upheaval, she knew how quickly a joyous moment could sour for a black family in unfamiliar territory. Martin, now a successful investor, and Ebony, a respected school administrator, hoped this trip would be an occasion for relaxation, not conflict. They reached the bustling terminal, weaving past travelers, lugging suitcases and half-finished coffees. After breezing through security, they found themselves at Gate B901 for American Airlines, Flight 372 to Chicago. Kayla marveled at the planes visible through the huge windows, while Jaden clutched his teddy bear, craning his neck for a better look outside. Martin and Ebony sank into seats near a charging station, grateful for a moment of rest. A gate agent named Patricia loomed behind the counter, greeting some passengers briskly while eyeing the Johnsons with noticeable suspicion. Martin exchanged a glance with Ebony, both uneasy, but determined to ignore what they assumed was typical airport stress. Yet when their boarding group was called Patricia's aloof, stares morphed into outright hostility. "All of you step up," she said curtly, scanning their boarding passes. Her gaze lingered on Martin's face, then flicked dismissively toward Ebony and Dorothy. "I need to see additional ID." Martin frowned. "Additional ID? We've passed through security already." "Is there a problem?" Patricia shrugged. "It's random screening. You look questionable." Her words sent a chill down Ebony's spine. Dorothy's lips pressed tight, her mind flashing back to past humiliations. The children, sensing tension, shifted nervously behind their grandmother. Martin handed over a second form of ID, as did Ebony and Dorothy, but Patricia stared at them with undisguised contempt. Peter, a supervisor, arrived, confusion creasing his brow as he checked their documents. "These look fine," he told Patricia. "They've got everything they need." But Patricia refused to budge, muttering they looked like trouble and that she wouldn't allow them to board. Within minutes, the Johnsons found themselves surrounded by uncertain onlookers. Some travelers took out their phones to record. Martin demanded an explanation. Patricia's only response was to coldly suggest they speak to customer service about a later flight. Anger mixed with embarrassment as an airport security officer approached, telling them they had to leave the gate area. Ebony clutched Jaden's hand, Her voice trembling with disbelief, Dorothy wrapped a protective arm around Kayla. They were ushered away from the very plane they had every right to board. The walk to the customer service desk felt endless. People in the terminal cast sympathetic glances or politely averted their eyes. The representative, a harried woman named Maria, seemed genuinely shocked by the Johnsons' story. She quickly typed up notes, offered apologies, and fetched her supervisor James, who led them into a cramped office. There, Martin and Ebony recounted each detail: Patricia's glowering stare, the extra ID demand, and ultimately being labeled trouble. James offered rebooked flights and meal vouchers, vowing to start an internal inquiry. But the damage was done. In front of their children, the Johnsons had been humiliated and made to feel unwelcome. Dorothy's eyes flashed with a mixture of sorrow and outrage. Ebony consoled Kayla, and Jaden insisting it wasn't their fault, Martin promised they would not let this injustice slide. Later, they boarded a different flight, arriving in Chicago late and frazzled. Their relatives embraced them at a family reunion, quickly sensing something was wrong. Word of the incident spread among cousins, aunts, and uncles, prompting shock and support. Ebony's cousin Tasha, a journalist, furiously took notes, determined to bring the story to light. That evening in Aunt Gladys's cozy basement, Martin connected with legal experts and influential friends. Emails poured in with colleagues, activists, and even civil rights organizations offering help. The Johnsons, exhausted but resolved, realized they stood on the cusp of a larger battle. Their ordeal was not an isolated case. It was one example of how prejudice could derail the everyday lives of black families. Determined to secure accountability, they set out to turn their pain into a defining moment. A chance to demand change, not just for themselves, but for all who might face similar discrimination. And while they had no idea how far this fight would take them, they knew in their hearts they could not walk away from it. The walk from Gate B19 to the nearest customer service desk felt like miles. The hustle and bustle of the terminal seemed louder, more chaotic, and the Johnsons were keenly aware of every glance tossed in their direction. Kayla clung to Dorothy's arm, while Jaden held on to Ebony's hand with a grip that signaled both fear and confusion. Martin led the way, his posture tense and his shoulders set. When they arrived at the customer service counter, an overworked representative named Maria greeted them. She was juggling multiple tasks at once, fielding phone calls, rebooking flights for other inconvenienced travelers, and trying to remain polite despite visible fatigue. "What can I do for you?" she asked, offering a practiced smile. Martin took a steadying breath. "We were just denied boarding on Flight 372 to Chicago. We were told to come here for assistance." Maria typed furiously into her terminal. "Let me see. You're the Johnson family, correct?" She scanned the screen, her brow furrowing. "It shows here that you were flagged for suspicious behavior." "That's unusual. May I ask what happened?" Martin recounted the incident, being asked for additional ID for no apparent reason. Patricia's remark about them looking like trouble, and the abrupt denial of boarding. Maria frowned more deeply with each detail. This was not standard procedure, and it certainly wasn't something that should happen to paying, law-abiding customers. "I'm so sorry this occurred," she said, voice full of genuine regret. "Let me see what we can do." She made a few phone calls, her frustration visibly mounting. "I'm told that you can be rebooked on a later flight, but you'll have to speak to the shift supervisor for an override on the system. This is definitely not normal." Dorothy gently placed a hand on Maria's counter. "We appreciate your help, dear. Can you get us someone higher up? Someone who can really fix this?" Maria nodded. "Yes, of course. Let me get my supervisor, James. Please have a seat over there. I'll call you when he's available." They sat in a small waiting area to the side, near a window overlooking the tarmac plains, taxied to and fro, oblivious to the emotional storm raging in the Johnson family. Ebony tried to comfort the children, offering them snacks. Dorothy silently stroked Kayla's hair, her eyes distant. Martin tapped his foot, anxiously, hands clenched into fists. After a 20-minute wait, James arrived, a stout man in his early 50s, wearing a crisp suit and a subdued tie. He introduced himself and extended a handshake. "I'm James Riley, the shift supervisor. Let's discuss this situation in my office." He offered, motioning them to follow. They navigated through a maze of hallways until they reached a cramped office with a desk, a couple of chairs, and a stack of paperwork. James closed the door, sat down, and listened intently as Martin explained the entire ordeal. Again, Ebony's eyes teared up as she described how Kayla and Jaden were frightened. Dorothy's voice shook with indignation when she recounted Patricia's words. James steepled his fingers. "I understand. This is absolutely unacceptable if it happened as you say. We have protocols, but none of them justify the sort of behavior you're describing." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'll need to conduct an internal inquiry, speak with the gate agent, and check any available security footage. But in the meantime, let me see what we can do to get you to Chicago." Martin nodded. "We appreciate that. But it's not just about getting us to Chicago now. We feel we've been discriminated against. We want a thorough resolution and accountability. Our kids were terrified. My mother was insulted. We were humiliated in front of an entire gate area." James met Martin's gaze. "I understand. For now, I can offer you seats on a flight leaving in 4 hours, plus meal vouchers. As for the official investigation, I'll escalate it to corporate. We do not condone such behavior from our employees." He handed Martin a small folder with the new boarding passes and vouchers inside. Even as James made these peace offerings, Ebony could sense the hollow ring in his voice. He seemed genuine enough, but the corporate machinery was vast and accountability could slip easily through its gears. Nevertheless, the family had little choice at the moment. They needed to reach Chicago. They thanked James, left the office, and found a quieter corner near a family-friendly restaurant. Kayla and Jaden were subdued, as if trying to process the morning's events. Kayla eventually piped up, "Mum, are we in trouble?" "We didn't do anything wrong, right?" Ebony pulled Kayla into a tight hug. "No, sweetie, we did nothing wrong. Sometimes people judge others unfairly. What happened was not our fault." Jaden looked at Martin with wide eyes. Dad, why did she say we looked like trouble?" Martin kneeled down to meet Jaden's gaze. "I wish I had a good answer, buddy. Sometimes people make bad assumptions, but you remember what we always say. No matter what others think, we know who we are. We hold our heads high." Dorothy sighed, her age-worn face etched with concern. "We've come a long way. But the road is still so long. It's heartbreaking to see my grandchildren go through this." Ebony took a moment to collect herself. "We need to document everything," she said, finally, her eyes flicking to Martin. "We can't let this slide." Martin nodded resolutely. "I'll call our attorney," he said. "This isn't just about a rebooked flight. What happened was wrong morally and legally." He stepped aside to make a phone call to a friend and colleague from his investment firm who also had a law background. Meanwhile, Ebony tried to distract the kids with talk of the fun they'd have in Chicago. Dorothy stepped to the window, looking out at the planes ascending into the sky, each one a symbol of freedom. Yet here they were, grounded by prejudice. The more they reflected on it, the more they realized this wasn't just a personal slight. It was part of a bigger pattern that too many people had experienced. The calls, the tearful stories, the viral social media posts. This was the same injustice in a new setting. They could either let it go and try to move on or stand up and push back. They decided to push back. It was a decision that would eventually lead them down a path no one could have anticipated, for in the coming days and weeks, their plight would resonate far beyond one flight, one airport, or even one airline. Their stand would become a catalyst for change, fueled by both heartbreak and unwavering conviction. Later that same day, the Johnsons finally touched down in Chicago after a long, exhausting layover. The kids were irritable from the extended travel, and Ebony's nerves were frayed. Dorothy wore a stoic expression, but every now and then, Martin noticed her shaking her head in disbelief. Their relatives met them with warm hugs and concerned questions. Word traveled fast in the family, and Ebony's cousin Tasha, who worked as a journalist, had already heard rumors of the incident. At the family reunion in a suburban park just outside the city, the sun was bright, and tables were laden with steaming casseroles, grilled meats, salads, and sweet tea. Normally the laughter of dozens of relatives would instantly lift the Johnsons' spirits. Yet the shock from that morning's events lingered. Groups of cousins and friends gathered around Martin, Ebony, and Dorothy, listening in disbelief to what had happened. "Man, that's messed up," Ebony's cousin Ronnie said, shaking his head. "I've heard about these incidents, but I never thought it would happen to you all. It shouldn't happen to anyone." Dorothy replied. Between bites of collard greens and hush puppies, Tasha took extensive notes, her journalistic instincts in overdrive. "Let's get this story out there," she told them. "We need to shine a light on this." Martin nodded, but was measured. "We have to do it right. We want accountability, not just a social media uproar. I've been on the phone with some of my connections back in Atlanta." They're appalled. Tasha's eyes flashed. "You know the power you hold." "Martin, don't act like you're some regular Joe. You can leverage those resources. Legal, financial media, whatever it takes. This is bigger than us." Most people in the family only knew that Martin worked in finance, but few realized the extent of his achievements. He wasn't just a small-time investor. Over the past decade, Martin had built a formidable portfolio, primarily focusing on tech startups, real estate, and more recently, aviation stocks. While he wasn't a household name in certain elite circles, Martin Johnson's name commanded respect. He had a knack for spotting undervalued opportunities and turning them into major wins. Ebony also came from a lineage of tenacious women. She had a master's degree in educational leadership and served as a champion of equity within her school district. That evening, after the reunion festivities, the Johnsons settled into the cozy basement suite of Ebony's Aunt Gladys's home. Tucked in the quiet suburbs, the house had a comforting lived-in charm. Crocheted blankets draped over chairs, framed photos of smiling children on the walls, the faint aroma of homemade pie lingering in the air. Once the kids were asleep, Martin and Ebony joined Dorothy at the small dining table that served as their makeshift workspace. Martin's laptop glowed softly, the screen displaying a flurry of emails and messages from friends, colleagues, and potential allies who had heard about their ordeal. "We have attorneys willing to take this on, Martin," told them several civil rights organizations have offered support. "It's a strong case for discrimination." Ebony nodded. "I'm so proud of you for building these networks. We'll need every bit of it." Dorothy placed her hand over Martin's. "You have a gift, son. You can not only demand an apology, you can demand systemic change." Martin sighed. "I just wish we didn't need to do this. I'd rather focus on my family, on positive ventures. But the fact is, this is where we are. And if we have to fight, We'll fight." They drafted statements, collected the kids' recollections as best as children can articulate, and compiled everything that happened from the moment they arrived at the gate to their forced departure. Ebony carefully typed out a chronological timeline, adding emotional details about Kayla and Jaden's reactions. After hours of meticulous work, Martin's phone rang. The caller ID showed the name of a top investor he had collaborated with on a real estate project. "Hey, Larry," he answered, stepping into another room to speak privately. Ebony and Dorothy exchanged glances, curious about the late-night call. When Martin returned, he looked resolute. Larry heard about the incident. He's furious. He's also well-connected, sits on the board of a major finance group that invests heavily in the airline industry. He says if we want to, we could push for a massive shareholder action against American Airlines' parent company, AMR Corporation. Dorothy's eyebrows shot up. Shareholder action. Goodness, that's serious. Ebony folded her arms, thinking, "I know you've invested in airline stocks before, Martin, but is it enough to sway the board?" Martin shook his head. "On my own, probably not. But if we partner with other stakeholders who also feel strongly about corporate responsibility, or if the public outcry becomes large enough to affect their stock price, we might have leverage. I've got contacts who own significant shares in competing airlines. We could orchestrate a push for policy changes across the industry." He paused, weighing his words. Larry also mentioned a more extreme possibility. An acquisition, or at least a controlling stake, if not the entire parent company. It would be complicated and unbelievably expensive, but not impossible under the right conditions. Dorothy let out a low whistle. "That's a tall order, son." Ebony's eyes gleamed, though a flicker of concern crossed her face. "Wow, buying the parent company. That's beyond anything I imagined. But do we even want that kind of fight? It's one thing to demand accountability. It's another to run an airline." Martin exhaled slowly. "I've always had an interest in aviation investing. It's a crucial industry. Airlines connect the world, but they're notoriously resistant to large-scale culture shifts. Taking on a parent company of that size, it's a David and Goliath scenario. But maybe that's what it takes to force real change." He let his gaze drift to the sleeping forms of Kayla and Jaden down the hall. What happened today can't keep happening to us or anyone else. If we can strike at the heart of an institution that tolerates discrimination, maybe we can create a ripple effect throughout the entire industry. For a moment, silence enveloped the small basement suite. Then Dorothy, with a tone of quiet conviction, said, "If anyone can do it, you can. And I believe we're at a crossroads. We either let them keep holding the power, or we seize it ourselves." Ebony glanced at her phone. Messages from Tasha, from other journalists, and from well-wishers crowded her notifications. The media is picking up steam on this story. They're hearing about the blatant way we were treated. People want to know if we plan to sue or if we're going to take more drastic action. Martin closed his laptop. "Let's rest tonight," he said, though his mind was far from calm. "We'll talk more in the morning. This is bigger than just us now. We have to approach it carefully." In the quiet hush of Aunt Gladys's basement, the Johnsons prepared to sleep. Each one of them, even the children in their own way, understood that their lives would not be the same. A line had been crossed that day. The question now was not whether they would fight, but how far they would go to ensure that this never happened again to them or to anyone else. The next morning dawned cool and bright. While the children played with their younger cousins upstairs, Martin and Ebony huddled around a small dining table in Aunt Gladys's living room, turning their attention to an impromptu Zoom call. On the screen was a mosaic of faces, some lawyers, some investors, and a few close friends, all drawn together by the Johnsons' harrowing story and Martin's urgent invitation. Larry's face appeared in one square, a sharp, silver-haired man who balanced a fatherly demeanor with a fierce acumen for business. "Martin Ebony," he said, by way of greeting. "I've convened a few allies I believe can help us chart a path forward." "Thanks, Larry," Martin said. "We appreciate everyone being here." One of the lawyers, a woman named Carla Thompson, cleared her throat. "We've all read through the details of your incident, and it's clear there's a strong case for discrimination. Legally, we could file a lawsuit, demand a settlement, push for policy changes." Another participant, an activist and PR strategist named Rachel Martin, jumped in. "The public angle is already raging. Social media is ablaze with the hashtag #JawHorse flying while black, spurred by your story. People are calling for boycotts. If this continues, the airline will be under massive pressure to respond." Larry nodded. "Yes, the pressure is building. AMR Corporation's board can't ignore this for long. Not when their stock could take a hit from consumer backlash." Martin looked contemplative. "I appreciate these angles. Legal PR activism. But there's another path we're considering a long shot. But it might hit at the core of the problem. We've discussed the idea of attempting a controlling stake in AMR Corporation." The room went quiet. Carla frowned. "Martin, that's not just big, it's colossal. The cost alone, are you sure about this?" Larry folded his arms. "I told Martin last night that with the right consortium of investors, it's not impossible. We'd need a strategic approach, gather existing shareholders who are dissatisfied, bring in new partners who share the vision and time it, so that we buy when the stock is at its weakest. Likely when negative press peaks." A skeptical voice piped up from a corner square on the screen. A hedge fund manager named Bryce. "I won't deny the moral impetus here, but from a purely economic standpoint, you're looking at billions. Maybe tens of billions. Are we sure it's worth the risk?" Ebony leaned forward, her voice steady. "We're not naive. This is about more than money. This is about dismantling a culture of discrimination. If we gain controlling influence, we can clean house and set new precedents for how airlines treat their customers of all backgrounds." Rachel chimed in. "Plus, the PR would be huge. A black family taking the reins of a major airline in response to racial discrimination. That's a story that resonates globally." The meeting continued for over an hour, with strategies laid out, cautions voiced, and alliances formed. By the end, they agreed on a two-pronged approach. First, push for immediate accountability through legal action and media exposure, ensuring that the specific gate agent and those who allowed such behavior are held responsible. Second, quietly begin to amass shares in AMR Corporation. They would start by pooling together existing stakeholders who might be sympathetic to the cause or at least see a profitable move when they spotted one. Once the call ended, Martin shut his laptop and looked to Ebony. A thrill of nervous energy coursed through both of them. They were standing on the edge of an unprecedented battle. They had fought for justice in smaller ways before, but never on such a grand stage. Soon Ebony's phone buzzed. It was Tasha texting to say that local Chicago media wanted an interview with the Johnson family. "This is our chance to call out the injustice," Ebony said, glancing at Martin. "I'll do it if you think it helps." Martin nodded. "We agreed to a multi-pronged strategy. Public awareness is part of that. Let's do it. Just be cautious with how much we reveal about our plans." Later that day, a local news crew arrived at Aunt Gladys's home. They set up cameras in the small, cozy living room. Ebony and Martin sat on the couch. Dorothy in a patterned armchair next to them, a family portrait behind them, The reporter, a young black woman named Monica Reed, approached with a calm but determined air. "Thank you for speaking with us," Monica said. "We've been following your story, and many in the community are outraged. Could you walk us through what happened?" The interview began with the details of the airport incident, each telling their side of the story. Ebony's eyes grew moist when she recounted Kayla's confusion and Jaden's fear. Dorothy spoke softly about her experiences in the 1960s, drawing parallels to the current day. When Monica asked about their next steps, Martin carefully explained, "We're exploring legal avenues, of course, but more importantly, we're fighting for policy changes. We want to ensure that what happened to us doesn't happen to anyone else." While Martin didn't mention the potential acquisition on camera, Ebony hinted at broader ambitions. "We're calling for accountability at the highest levels," she said. "It's time for corporations like AMR Corporation, which owns American Airlines, to step up and prove they won't tolerate bigotry." The interview aired that evening, and social media lit up with support. Emails poured in, and the phone rang non-stop with people sharing their own airport discrimination stories. The Johnsons found themselves at the center of a rallying cry for change. "Stay strong," Ebony's principal texted, pledging the support of their entire school district. Martin's father-in-law, a retired civil rights lawyer, offered pro bono assistance in drafting public statements, and from all corners of the internet came messages of solidarity. People of all races, ages, and backgrounds outraged by blatant prejudice in an era that prided itself on progress. That night, as the children slept upstairs, Martin paced the living room, phone in hand. He was on a call with a financial contact who reported that some major investors were pulling out of AMR Corporation stocks due to negative publicity. "This is the window," the contact said. "If you're serious about acquiring a controlling stake, we need to move fast while the price slides." Martin felt the weight of the decision. Stepping into this fight meant risking enormous capital-forging alliances that could shift alliances in the corporate world. It also meant subjecting his family to ongoing public scrutiny. But each time he thought about Kayla's anxious face, Ebony's silent tears, Dorothy's trembling voice, he found renewed resolve. He ended the call and found Ebony leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, eyes full of understanding. She didn't need to ask for details. She already knew what it meant. With a single nod, they acknowledged they were in this together. Come what may, somewhere in the distance, a train rumbled through the Chicago suburbs, a faint whistle echoing in the night air. In that moment, Martin felt a surge of determination, akin to a train on a mission, unstoppable, forging a path through the darkness. He placed his phone on the table. "If they won't give us justice," he murmured, "we'll take it ourselves." Within days, the Johnson story had spread beyond Chicago. National news outlets picked it up, amplifying the conversation about airline discrimination. Large swathes of social media united under hashtags like "Yanhula flying while black," "Now justice for the Johnsons," and "Change the skies." Demonstrations popped up at airports in New York, Los Angeles, and Miami, where people held signs demanding fair treatment for all travelers. Civil rights organizations rallied behind the family, vowing to expose institutional racism embedded in corporate policies. Media vans started lining Aunt Gladys's street, prompting a curious note from her elderly neighbors who watched from porches sipping iced tea. But for all the attention, the Johnsons remained humble. They offered heartfelt interviews, but never indulged in self-aggrandizement. Ebony calmly explained on morning talk shows the emotional toll the incident had on Kayla, and Jaden and Dorothy recounted the painful echoes of her past. Martin addressed the structural issues, carefully weaving in calls for better training, accountability, and diversity in corporate leadership. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Martin's and Ebony's phones buzzed with messages from potential allies. Some were private citizens wanting to share their experiences or donate to a legal fund. Others were influential figures in business or government, intrigued by the Johnsons' plan to address the issue at its root. One late afternoon, Martin received a call from an unexpected source, Jeremiah Langston, a respected civil rights icon who'd worked closely with leaders like the late Congressman John Lewis. "I've been following your story, son," Jeremiah said in a gravelly baritone. "We've fought for these rights for decades, and I hate to see these old ghosts still haunting us. I want to help Martin's breath caught." He'd read about Jeremiah's work, organizing peaceful protests, lobbying for equal employment legislation, and being a force in bridging the gap between activism and policy. "We're honored," Martin managed to say. They spoke for an hour, culminating in Jeremiah offering to organize a national town hall on racial equity in travel. It would include representatives from major airlines, lawmakers, and travelers with lived experiences. "It's time we confront this head-on," Jeremiah declared. Meanwhile, Ebony fielded a call from Dr. Amelia Chung, an activist who specialized in unconscious bias training for large corporations. "I want to help craft a program that can be implemented across all airports." Dr. Chung said, "If we tackle the training aspect, we can at least reduce some of the prejudice that leads to these incidents." The synergy of high-profile activists, legal experts, and conscientious business leaders formed a mosaic of support around the Johnsons. Each day, Martin meticulously added to a spreadsheet that tracked potential partnerships, media leads, and investor interest. The scale of the project ballooned. What began as a quest for an apology had turned into a crusade for systemic change, culminating in the audacious plan to buy a controlling stake in AMR Corporation. "I've scheduled a call with a group of minority-led venture capitalists who might join us," Martin told Ebony one evening. "They've got deep pockets and share our vision of creating a more equitable corporate landscape." Ebony, exhausted from a day full of interviews and coordinating the kids' online lessons. They were temporarily out of school due to the sudden family trip, sank into a chair. "This is incredible," she admitted, "but it's also terrifying. Where does this end? Will the kids have to live under a microscope if we become the face of an airline's leadership?" Martin kneeled beside her, placing a reassuring hand on hers. "We can't predict every outcome, but I know we can't back down. This isn't just about our family anymore. It's about changing an entire system." His words hung in the air, brimming with conviction. Ebony nodded, tears in her eyes. She thought about their early struggles, back when they were just starting out, scraping by in a tiny apartment, dreaming of stability. And now here they were, navigating the complexities of high-stakes finance to challenge a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Life had a funny way of coming full circle. As the Johnsons prepared for bed, Dorothy sat in the living room, rereading an article about the incident posted on a major news site. The piece highlighted their journey from the humiliating gateside confrontation to the rising groundswell of support. Dorothy felt a mixture of pride and sorrow. She never wanted her family to bear such a burden, but she also recognized this might be their calling. Sometimes history knocks on your door and you have to answer. Before turning in, Dorothy opened the front door for some fresh air. The street was quiet now, the media vans gone, but she could sense the restless energy simmering across the nation. She recalled the bus boycotts, the sit-ins, the marches, how each began with a spark of injustice felt too keenly to ignore. She whispered a prayer into the night air that her grandchildren would see a day when such battles were no longer necessary. Then she closed the door softly, determined to fight as long as she had breath in her body. In the stillness of the house, the resolve of 3 generations of Johnsons stood firm, ready to rewrite history in bold letters. Months of furious planning, strategizing, and alliance-building reached a tipping point. One Wednesday afternoon, Martin and Ebony found themselves in a glass-walled conference room in downtown Atlanta, high above the city streets. The building belonged to a law firm that had offered them space for an important meeting, a gathering of potential investors, civil rights activists, and senior consultants. It was the day they would decide once and for all whether to move forward with attempting to buy a controlling stake in AMR Corporation. The table was lined with polished portfolios, laptops, and bottles of water. Martin stood at the head, a projector screen behind him, displaying charts and figures. Ebony sat at his right, wearing a sleek navy dress that exuded quiet authority. Dorothy was there too, flanked by Tasha, who had taken a few days off her journalism job to help coordinate the event. Larry cleared his throat. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "We've reached the crossroads today. Martin will present our final calculations, the risks and rewards, and the moral imperative behind this potential acquisition." Martin launched into a well-prepared presentation. Slides flashed, showing AMR Corporation's financials, public statements, and recent stock performance. Negative press from the down-to-flying while black movement had caused a noticeable dip in their share price, though the airline's leadership tried to remain outwardly confident. "We believe this is an opportunity to buy shares at a discounted rate," Martin explained, leveraging the public's demand for change. "With enough backing, we can secure a controlling interest." He switched to another slide, showing the synergy between the activism front and the corporate structure. "Once we have that influence, we can enforce new policies, mandatory bias, training stronger, anti-discrimination measures, and a direct line of accountability to the board for any such incidents." A potential investor raised his hand. "What about the financial viability? Is this an emotional buy, or can we actually turn a profit?" Ebony fielded that question. "We're not just buying to make a statement. AMR Corporation is still a major airline conglomerate. Properly managed with a refreshed public image, it can thrive financially. People will want to support an airline that takes a strong stand against discrimination." Another voice, this time from a civil rights leader present, chimed in. "This is bigger than finances. It's about setting a historic precedent, if we as a community can unite under a cause and gain tangible corporate power, it shows the world we mean business." Quite literally, nods circled the room. The synergy between moral mission and economic strategy was evident, yet the enormity of the task loomed. Buying out a significant stake in an airline was no small feat, requiring billions of dollars in investment. Even with Martin's resources, Larry's connections, and a coalition of smaller investors, they needed a final push from heavyweight partners, major hedge funds, or philanthropic billionaires who saw value in both moral progress and a potential financial windfall. That push came in the form of a surprise guest, Catherine Liu, a reclusive billionaire known for philanthropic projects centered around social justice. She arrived partway through the meeting, discreetly taking a seat at the back. Martin paused mid-presentation as murmurs spread through the room. Catherine waved a hand for him to continue. "Don't mind me," she said softly, her voice carrying a commanding undertone. "I just want to see how serious you are about this." Encouraged, Martin resumed, concluding with a bold statement. "If we do this right, we're not just buying an airline, we're purchasing the ability to reform an entire industry. This can be a blueprint for how marginalized groups can reclaim power in corporate structures." When he finished, the room was silent, Charged with anticipation, Catherine Liu stood and all eyes locked on her. Dressed in a simple grey pantsuit, she radiated a quiet confidence. "I've spent my life supporting initiatives that aim to elevate those who've been silenced," she began. "What you're doing here isn't just talk. It's a concrete plan." She cast her eyes around the table. "I can pledge significant capital enough to tip the scales if the rest of you commit wholeheartedly, because if I'm in, I'm all in. This means we don't just buy, we overhaul. We make AMR the model airline for equality and service excellence." A wave of relief and excitement washed over Martin and Ebony. Dorothy grabbed Tasha's hand, her eyes misting with gratitude. Catherine's involvement would turbocharge their efforts. They spent the next hour working out details: who would handle the legal intricacies, how they'd navigate the complexities of acquiring such a large portion of AMR's shares, and what governance structure they'd implement once in control. By the end of the meeting, a formal agreement was in the works. Papers were drafted, and although it might take weeks or even months to finalize the acquisition, the path was clear. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Catherine Liu pulled the Johnsons aside. "Be prepared," she warned gently. "The airline's current leadership won't roll over. They'll likely fight back and not always above board. Make sure you're ready for a tough battle." Martin nodded. "We anticipated that. We've got good lawyers and a strong moral argument. Plus the public is on our side." Catherine smiled, though it didn't fully erase her concerned expression. "Public sentiment can shift quickly. Keep your message strong, your facts straight, and your hearts grounded." With that, she departed, leaving the Johnsons newly emboldened, but also aware that their bold dream just became very real and potentially dangerous. The next phase of their journey would pit them against the entrenched powers of corporate America. Yet, as Dorothy said, quietly in the elevator ride down, they messed with the wrong family. Negotiations began in earnest. Over the next few weeks, Martin Ebony and their growing coalition of investors set about acquiring shares at a breakneck pace. Quiet deals were made through shell companies and strategic brokers, all while public sentiment continued to drive AMR Corporation's stock price into minor turbulence. The airline's board of directors publicly dismissed the Johnson statements, brushing them off as unfortunate misunderstandings. Privately, though, the board scrambled to contain the growing fire. Internal memos revealed plans to ramp up PR campaigns, touting American Airlines' diverse and inclusive work culture. Executive leadership gave half-hearted apologies and promised comprehensive reviews of their customer service training. Meanwhile, Patricia, the gate agent who had started this entire saga, found herself placed on administrative leave. Anonymous leaks suggested she was under internal investigation, though what that entailed remained unclear. Some employees claimed Patricia had been scapegoated to quell the media storm, while others insisted her bias ran deeper than a single incident. As the Johnsons group inched closer to the threshold of a controlling stake, a series of strange events unfolded. One evening, Martin received an anonymous phone call, warning him to back off, or your family might regret it. He hung up trying to steady his nerves, but Ebony saw the tension in his eyes. Then, while Ebony was out running errands, someone keyed her car in the parking lot. Deep scratches that spelled a crude message. "Stop," Dorothy reported suspicious vehicles idling near the house. At odd hours, their engines revving ominously before speeding off. "These aren't coincidences," Ebony told Martin one night, frustration and fear in her voice. "They're trying to intimidate us." Martin nodded grimly. "We'll tighten security, report everything to the authorities. We've come too far to let threats stop us now." Larry and Catherine Liu concurred. They arranged for private security details at critical meetings and advised Martin to encrypt sensitive communications. Still, the tension was palpable. A multi-billion-dollar corporation didn't lose power without a fight. A more insidious blow arrived in the form of a manufactured scandal. One morning, Ebony woke up to an onslaught of messages about an alleged affair she was supposedly having with a co-worker at her school. Grainy photos surfaced online, obviously doctored, depicting her in compromising positions. The claims were baseless, but the tabloids and gossip blogs ran with it. Ebony's hands shook as she read the salacious headlines. "This is insane," she said to Martin, tears welling up. "It's so obviously fake, but some people are going to believe it." "It's a smear campaign," Martin said, trying to keep calm. "We'll have a forensic analysis done to prove the photos are doctored. Our attorneys will issue cease and desist letters to every outlet that runs this story." Despite their best efforts, the rumor temporarily shifted. The online discourse away from the discrimination case, trolls seized the opportunity to brand Ebony a hypocrite, sowing doubt about her character and motives. Exhausted and upset, Ebony wondered aloud if this fight was worth it. Dorothy took her hand. "Don't let them break your spirit, child," she said, her voice trembling with resolve. This is exactly how they operate. Fear lies intimidation. We stand firm under immense pressure. The Johnsons pressed forward. The legal team unveiled evidence that the photos were manipulated, and Ebony's co-worker publicly testified to the falsehood of the affair claim. Gradually, support rallied back to their side. The sabotage attempts only fueled the public's anger at what was perceived as a dirty corporate play. Amid these struggles, a key financial breakthrough arrived. Catherine Liu managed to secure commitments from additional philanthropic investors, ensuring they had the funds to complete their acquisition plan. With each passing day, they edged closer to the share count that would grant them majority voting power at AMR Corporation. In a final desperate move, AMR's board attempted to pass a poison pill measure, an anti-takeover device. If enacted, it would allow current shareholders to dilute the stock, making it much harder for the Johnsons Group to reach a controlling stake. A high-stakes legal battle ensued with both sides, presenting arguments about corporate governance and shareholder rights. Public sentiment remained fiercely on the Johnsons' side, however, and consumer advocacy groups joined their cause. Ultimately, a federal judge issued an injunction against the poison pill measure, ruling that the Johnsons Group had demonstrated a legitimate, lawful pursuit of corporate control. The board was left scrambling with their last defensive play blocked. By now, the tension was almost unbearable. The Johnson children, Kayla and Jaden, had to contend with reporters lingering outside their school gates, though local police provided some measure of protection. Ebony balanced her role as a mother with intense public scrutiny and the emotional toll of near-constant legal battles. Dorothy kept the family's morale afloat with her unyielding faith and grandmotherly warmth, and Martin, often running on just a few hours of sleep, orchestrated the final steps of the takeover with unwavering focus. Through it all, the words of Patricia at Gate B19 still rang in their ears. "They look like trouble." Those words had lit a fuse of indignation that now blazed into a movement. If all went according to plan, the Johnsons would soon hold the keys to an airline conglomerate, turning the very seat of discrimination into a platform for justice. In a sprawling boardroom at AMR Corporation's headquarters, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The Johnsons, flanked by their legal team and key investors, like Larry and Catherine Liu, sat on one side of a long mahogany table. On the other side sat the current board members, including the CEO and several high-ranking executives. Cameras and microphones stood in the corners of the room, capturing every detail for the sake of transparency and perhaps posterity. This special shareholders' meeting had been convened to vote on the appointment of new board members, a direct result of the Johnsons' majority stake. The public was riveted, with media outlets streaming the proceedings live. It was a modern-day David versus Goliath showdown, but this time David had amassed a small army of stones. The corporate secretary called the meeting to order, and the formalities began. Martin watched the roll call, his heart pounding in his chest. He glanced at Ebony, who squeezed his hand under the table, reminding him to breathe. When the time came for the vote, the Johnsons' representatives cast their shares. One by one, allied shareholders followed suit, each vote echoing across the silent room. With a sense of finality, the corporate secretary announced the outcome. The Johnsons' coalition held a controlling majority. The board would be restructured. Effective immediately, Martin was appointed as the new chairman of AMR Corporation, and Ebony was named Chief Diversity and Community Relations Officer. Her educational and leadership background perfectly suited for the role. A stunned silence settled among the ousted board members. Some had already turned in their resignations, seeing the writing on the wall weeks ago. Others stared furious but powerless. The press cameras flashed, capturing the moment a black family assumed leadership of one of the world's most recognized airline conglomerates, just months after being denied boarding at an airport gate. With the gavel's symbolic strike, it was official. The Johnsons were now at the helm. The room erupted in applause from their supporters, while the remaining old guard executives filed out in shocked defeat. The spectacle was broadcast worldwide, instantly becoming a defining moment in corporate and social justice history. Yet the climax of one battle marked the beginning of another. The new leadership team quickly rolled up their sleeves. On day one, Martin and Ebony instituted immediate policy changes, a zero-tolerance rule for discriminatory behavior, with a direct line to upper management for complaints bypassing middle-level bureaucracy. Unbiased training programs designed by Dr. Amelia Chung were mandated for all airline employees, from baggage handlers to top executives. External audits would be conducted quarterly with reports accessible to the public. Transparency is the bedrock of trust, Ebony declared at her first press conference. We can't change what happened to us, but we can prevent it from happening to others. Then came the moment of hard karma, the reckoning that resonated through the halls of corporate power. Patricia, the gate agent, whose prejudice ignited this entire series of events, was officially let go. Despite having been placed on leave, she had still been receiving partial benefits. Under the new regime, a thorough investigation confirmed multiple complaints from passengers of color who reported feeling targeted or harassed by her. The final report was damning, citing repeated misconduct. Her termination was swift and public. When reporters caught up with Patricia in the parking lot of her local grocery store, she appeared disheveled and bitter, lashing out at the cameras. "I never meant any harm," she insisted. But her words rang hollow. The woman who had casually dismissed the Johnsons as trouble now faced the consequences of her actions, a life overshadowed by her own prejudice. At the same time, certain executives who had orchestrated the smear campaign against Ebony found themselves facing legal repercussions. AMR's new legal department pursued them for defamation, resulting in hefty fines, public apologies, and the end of more than one illustrious career. In an almost poetic twist, the board members who once tried to poison pill the Johnsons out of contention were compelled to watch their own shares plummet in value collateral damage from reputational harm. The final blow landed on those in the old guard who had turned a blind eye to rampant discrimination within the organization. The new leadership's audits brought to light a trove of internal emails showing how certain executives downplayed passenger complaints and resisted diversity initiatives. This triggered a wave of resignations, forced retirements, and public admonitions, for Martin, Ebony, Dorothy Kayla, and Jaden Life had transformed beyond measure. With corporate success came immense responsibilities and an even larger spotlight. They relocated to a comfortable home near AMR's corporate headquarters, ensuring that the children's education remained stable and protected from too much media frenzy. They balanced time between running the airline, engaging with community outreach, and simply being a family, something they refused to lose sight of amidst all the upheaval. On a crisp morning, a few weeks after the takeover, Martin and Ebony took Kayla and Jaden to the very same airport gate where they'd once been denied boarding. This time, security personnel greeted them with respectful nods. Patricia was nowhere in sight. In her place stood new, carefully trained staff members who beamed proudly at the sight of their new corporate chairman's family. Before boarding a flight to Chicago this time, a routine trip for a family gathering, Martin and Ebony paused with the kids. They looked out the massive airport windows, where a fleet of American Airlines planes were lined up. On each tail fin, the company logo remained, but it now stood for something else, a testament to resilience, equality, and the power of refusing to back down. Dorothy joined them, resting a hand on Martin's shoulder. "I wish your father could see this," she whispered. "He'd be so proud." Martin swallowed hard, his eyes brimming with gratitude. "We made it, Mama, and this is just the beginning." In that moment, all the threats, the sabotage, and the humiliation felt distant. The family took a collective breath, then turned to board the plane. This time treated as the valued passengers they had always deserved to be. High above the clouds, they savored their victory, knowing that true success was measured not only by acquiring wealth or power, but by using it to uplift others and transform the world for the better. And so, the Johnsons' incredible journey from a family denied boarding at an airport to the leaders of one of the world's largest airlines stands as a beacon of hope and courage. Their story reminds us that a single spark of injustice can light a fire of change, especially when it's fueled by determination, unity, and the unwavering belief that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. If you found yourself moved by the triumphs and trials of the Johnson family, please take a moment to support this channel. Like this video, if their resilience inspired you. Share it to spread the message that discrimination will never have the final say. And most importantly, subscribe for more stories that spotlight the power of love, justice, and perseverance. Together, we can stand against prejudice and continue to elevate voices that demand a more inclusive world.